I feel like everybody has an infatuation with mediocrity and trying to be extraordinary at the same time, because on two sides of the same coin, on one side they're trying to, they feel like they need to be extraordinary, but on the other side they feel like, I don't feel like working for this. So yeah. I feel like stuff like the lottery. Like, I think America has obsession with getting like they feel like they need to deserve something for nothing. Like the lottery and raffles and all these different, I put in a little bit and so give me all of it type attitude is everywhere. And I feel like when people see that, they take it to heart and are like, I deserve this and I deserve that. And when in real life, they don't feel like they need to work for it. Yeah, I feel like they try to skip over the main parts and try to the easy parts of trying to achieve the dream. Like in any process, there's the easy parts and there's the really hard parts. And most of the time, not most of the time, I can't say that. Sometimes people like to skip around the hard parts and just say, I deserve this because I want to do it, which isn't a reason at all. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah.
How did it change and shift? It was more like, yeah, I mean, when I started dreaming, I dreamed with no prior knowledge of anything. You know what I'm saying? So, which is the beauty part of it, is like there's still a childish nature to the dream. But then, as you start going through a few things, it's not that what's the word? It wasn't that I scaled back anything, but I just I refocused and reshaped it to make it make sense. Because, for example, like, I think a very ambitious dream is like, no more poverty ever again. No one will be poor. That's a crazy dream. I don't think it's impossible, but it's more so when you have a dream like that and you're like, you know what, I'm going to make sure everyone never has poverty again. The thing is, that's not that far away. That's a very possible thing. The thing about it is you have to think about how are you able to achieve that thing. I think, for example, like, let's say we use the example of diminishing poverty, right? I think that's very possible as long as you understand. Like, for example, it's naturally going that way. Like, things in quality are starting to become better and everything is starting to be pushed up. And I think in the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it will diminish. Does that mean it's going to diminish tomorrow? Maybe it won't. Maybe it won't diminish in my lifetime. But I think if you understand that dreams aren't really about instant gratification, and it's kind of about delayed gratification, then maybe you can kind of shift that focus into something else, which shifts into something else, into a bigger plan. Instead of just being one-track minded to getting to one specific goal without thinking that there's steps to this thing or process or patience involved. So it really wasn't me kind of like compromising my dreams. It was more me compromising the process of how I was going to get it done. That's what happened.
I think it's always systems, like, period, right? So a black man trying to progress in an alternative manner in America is bumping against all systems, period. It's not an optimal environment for this seed to grow. So when the seed starts to prosper, it's doing some alternative things internally in order for it to sprout in such a manner, right? So off bucks, you're bumping up against people that don't understand. You follow what I'm saying? So as far as like detraction, I would just say, like, people that are just up against, that are succeeding at the norm or are trying to succeed at doing the norm. But I wouldn't say I've ever had detractors. I call, like, haters. I just call them late adopters, right? Because if your job is to succeed, right, and if you don't succeed, they're right. They're not hating. They're just, they're giving you some criticism maybe. But if you succeed, that's when you could be hurt. They're just wrong. You follow what I'm saying? I don't even consider people haters. It's like, oh, they late adopters, because either they're gonna get on or they're just gonna admit that they dislike it or they was wrong. Period. That's just how it goes. Your job is to go and be the best you. You don't have no haters. You just got late adopters, man. We got, you know. So I don't think of people as detractors. It's just people, you know, maybe less informed or more highly informed than I, and I'm incorrect. You know, it's just how we all just trying to figure it out, and we all build our defense mechanisms accordingly. And sometimes you bump up against it more so people's defense mechanism than you really bumping up against them and who their ego and who they see themselves as, or who someone told them they should be. You know, my father told me I'm supposed to be the best, so I'm sorry. It's hard for me to acknowledge that I'm not, you know, so.
I think that my biggest dissuaders, and it's hard to say, but it's true, my biggest dissuaders unintentionally were my family. Once I got grown, once they realized, oh, he really gonna try to do this, right? Like, oh, you got your college degree, but you really about to move up there and at the time I'm 21, you know, 21 years old, you know, you feel like there's only one way to do a thing. So I'm like, yo, I can't get no job. I gotta go 100% in because this is how you do it. And if I get a job, then how am I make my meetings? And like, that did not exist, meetings that didn't exist yet. But I'm like, what if I get a meeting? You know what I mean? And so my mother was kind of like, yo, get a job, kid. Like, you know, this is it's almost like a waste of a degree and a waste of time and a waste of money. And sort of like, yo, at some point you gotta be responsible and grow up. It was that kind of conversation. And I know those conversations mean well, but they tend to be painfully dismissive. Right? Because what it's really saying is that your dream is not responsible. Like having a dream is irresponsible, right? And there are ways for us to have nuanced conversations, but that's not what happens oftentimes. It's like, yo, put down your little dream, get you a job like all your friends back home, buy you a house like all your friends back home, find you a wife like all your friends back home. Let's talk about kids. And I'm like, I'm 22. Right? Like, but that it's like, it's the idea that there are these social benchmarks that you're expected to make. And if you don't make those things, your family, though they love you, especially black families, because they come out of spaces of oppression and marginalization, they fear for your life. And that fear oftentimes looks like dissuasion.
I think some of the biggest challenges that I've had and, you know, all these kind of expressions in my life is, you know, being around or maybe attempting to rely or having to engage with people who don't have vision, you know, and this is something that it's really hard, you know, it's a realization you have to come to is like, you can't expect people without vision to see you when you live on this kind of plane, like when you are constantly evolving, when you're constantly moving, you know, you'll never be in focus for those people. And you know, and they find ways into all of your environments, and you know, it just ends up being, you know, quite a challenge because, you know, now you have to navigate something. You know, you have to navigate the minutia. You know, because, you know, people who participate in these like big vision, these big ideas, these big changes, these things that are so conceptual, you know, those things are hard and heavy enough. And, you know, I feel like the biggest detractor, the biggest distraction, the biggest challenge is not that. It's never that. It's never the big work. It's the minutia. It's the people and the things that are around you, the obstacles that appear. And when you're running this fast, you know, every obstacle becomes a potential major threat. You know, it's one thing to, you know, step on a rock while you're just walking around, but stepping on a rock when you're at full gait could potentially bring you down.
You have to work for it. I mean, I would say don't give up, but if I have to say that, that means that you don't really want to do this. Because if I have to say don't give up, that means that you were thinking about giving up. Which, if you really wanted to achieve your dream, you shouldn't. You shouldn't. That shouldn't even be in your mind. So what I would say is you have to do the hard parts. You can't just skip over it, and don't feel like anybody you're entitled to or anybody deserves you any like form of boost, because you don't.
I think first of all you have to understand people's passion and things that make them run. People ideas and aspiration is not dependent upon what your opinion is. My son, I guess he was about 8 years old, he got involved in this quote unquote hip hop movement. And when it came on the radio, the station, whatever it was, had probably the weakest signal around here. And he would be listening to that stuff with all of this static and interference that you get when you have a weak radio signal. But anyway, I told him at a very early age that music wasn't going nowhere. And I resented, in a sense, of him liking that, because I'm a jazz person, so here you go, he was supposed to like jazz. But he was a hip hopper. And one day I was working for a law firm, and one day one of the salesmen I used to have to deal with, we were talking about our kids, and I was telling him that how disappointed I was that my son loved this hip hop stuff. That's what I was calling it, because I thought it was a bunch of noise. And I was complaining about his passion. Of course, I didn't see it as a passion then. And he's the one that woke me up. And he said, you need to understand that even though you may not care for his passion, that's his passion. That's what he loves. And that you should encourage, not discourage his passion, because that's his passion, not yours, not meant for you to like, because he is who he is and you are who you are. So you can't determine what he likes or don't like, as long as it's not illegal or criminal. And so then I began to respect that. And I never forgot that, because there's so many things in life we think we know that we don't know. You get to a certain age, a certain place in life, we think that we are some kind of authority on things that we know little or nothing about. So we don't try to learn. Learning, is nothing negative about learning. You don't have to agree with it, but you can learn a lot by respecting other people's passion. You might say, well, I wouldn't do that. Well, we ain't talking about you. Okay, so I learned from that you shouldn't disrespect other people's passion or their area of interest. And I'm very proud of my son. I think he's done very well, primarily because he got into this stuff at 8 years old. It's amazing. He goes all over the world. He's been places I haven't been. And I'll never forget, one day I got a phone call, picked up the phone, and my son was on the phone. I asked him where he was at. He said he's on the Great Wall of China. And I never imagined for 1 second that that's someplace he would get to see in a lifetime. And he was there because of his passion, because of his music. That's how he's been able to go all over the world, and I think that's wonderful. He's been more places than I have. I've been to a lot of foreign countries, but he superseded me. So I'm much more aware, and I think an open mind and a willingness to learn about other things and other people and other culture is a wonderful thing, because it gives me, at least, a great feeling of security, that I don't get all wrapped around the axle about stuff that people get into daily, primarily because they don't understand it. So in a lot of cases, they don't understand it, so they reject it. And that's not a good mindset.
I feel like we all have like that inner voice, right? Like that inner voice is just constantly telling you that, yo, you love this, right? And as much as, yeah, you maybe need to get out and do something that's a little easier, right? That's a little bit more by the book. That voice is just constantly in your ear, like, yeah, but you know you'd rather be doing this, right? And so listen, it's ultimately you. Like, you got to listen to yourself, man. Listen to that inner voice. Follow your heart. You know where your heart is, and just keep pushing at it until you make it into something. I always look at it as, and the way I try to explain it to people is, you invest a lot of time into that from a very young age because you loved it. Why throw all of that away? Who's to say, like, you being, like we always say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like, what do you want to be right now? Okay, so get started and just keep going. And then put so much time and energy in it that it would be an absolute waste to throw it away, right? To go to anything else would be starting over. And it's not to say you can't do that, but why would you want to, right? So just follow that inner voice, man. Keep pushing forward. Stop making excuses and just make it happen, you know?
As a kid, I loved art. I loved drawing. I loved music. I loved, claymation. I loved animation. And, your parents thinking they're protecting you, especially parents of immigrants. Parents being immigrants, they're like, nah, you got 3 pathways. You can be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. So you better go learn the periodic table elements. You better learn times tables, but you're not about to learn how to shade, and you definitely not about to learn how to play no chords. And then when I got older, I remember, going to college made my parents happy, right? You get the good grades, you get the good SAT scores, you go to school, and I just knew it wasn't for me. And I remember when I dropped out, like, telling my parents was a blow, because I knew it would make them unhappy. And you feel like you're letting them down, but I knew that college wasn't a pathway to happiness for me. And that's not a knock on anyone who goes to college or graduates, because I think everyone has their own pathway, but it wasn't for me. I was going for other people. There's a couple. So my grandmother, as long as I can remember, I think she instilled it in me. I think that desire to figure that out came from her. As long as I can remember, she said, you can be anything, do anything, and your smile will change the world. Like, always smile no matter what. I had an Aunt Barbie who passed away, who would do everything she could in her power to make other people good. And so I would come with the craziest harebrained schemes of, like, how I'm gonna, like, cut grass and make money for the summer to buy these shoes. And she would be the one to be like, all right, well, here's your $200 to go buy your lawnmower. Like, and she knew I wouldn't mind to cut no grass. Like, that's not me. I'm not nowhere no snake's gonna be, but she always supported. And even in dropping out of college, I remember calling her first and just saying, like, I don't really know what I'm gonna do. I don't really have a plan, but I know this isn't it. And she was always a voice. I was like, well, God's got you, and I know you'll figure it out. And I think having that is huge. Without that, I don't think I'd have the balls to have taken those leaps. And then when you take the leaps and you realize you always land on your feet, it makes you more bold as you get older. And with each leap, now I don't even leap with fear anymore. Now I'm just like, all right, next leap, let's go.
Wow, people or systems, that's really good. People that don't quite understand that you have a desire and you have a dream, that it's not about them anyway, so it's those people. This dude asked me, like, what are you gonna do how are you gonna help a pregnant woman? I was like, lots of ways. Maybe in your culture, you don't quite understand that. I said, but I don't have to be a woman to support another woman in having a baby. So people that don't quite understand what your dreams are and what that means to you, and don't even know who you are. They think they may know who you are. Even those people that have been, very cautious about how they live their lives. I'm a risk taker, so I'm just go out there and and challenge myself. So systems, wow. Just kind of like economics, the money part. You should start your own thing, Mark. I'm like, it takes money to do that, and you need to rent that space. I don't have that money. I don't have that husband with the money and talking about, I don't have that. So, but I do have those folks that are there, like, hey, you're the first person on my list that I call. The last couple weeks I've had, some chair massage gigs. I'm the go-to. So those people have been really important. But the people that haven't been, they're, I don't really see them a lot. I don't have time for them. But the systems, I think it's more about economics and just kind of like those are the things that probably have been a hindrance to a certain degree.
I've been accused, and I think it's right, so it's not even an accusation, but the thing on me is that I don't give myself any credit. I don't give myself enough credit. So it don't matter what I do, I'm still like, oh, that was fine, okay, yeah. You know, so even now I'm writing a book about Kendrick Lamar, it's like, I feel weird talking about it now because it's such a topic of conversation that I do struggle with that sometimes. Like, I don't want to be the arrogant dude who's walking around saying like, yes, I'm writing this book and da 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 da. It's like, who cares? Like, I still need to do it. You know what I mean? So I feel like, to your question, man, like, there's nothing wrong with running a resume because you got to, because people are quick to forget, especially as an African-American man. Like, people will forget. They just, when they see you walk in with the baseball hat and the hoodie or whatever, they just assume like you're not who you are. Like, you haven't worked up to this place where you deserve to be respected. So every so often you gotta like, no, okay, I did this, I wrote here, I did that, da, 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 and I can cover any record you want me to cover. It doesn't even matter genre. You know, when I first started covering music, before I had any credentials, I'd walk into meetings and people would be like, oh, we don't need any rap writers. It's like, well, wait a minute, like, that's fine, like, I get it, but I can also cover this metal record too. You know what I mean? So I feel like the concept of hubris is, I think I go with the more traditional definition. I go with the more traditional definition where it's like, yeah, there are people who just, they can't wait to tell you what they've done. But if someone asks you, you gotta let them know, you gotta tell the full story. And I don't think there's nothing wrong with that, because I feel like 9 times out of 10, we don't celebrate ourselves enough as is. And again, I'm guilty of that, you know what I mean? Where I don't talk enough about what I've done. So when you do talk about what you do, it's this feeling of, well, you know, it's a little too arrogant, I need to just grind, you know, the whole rise and grind mentality. But after a while, I think you've earned the right to be a little, you know, just to stun a little bit, like, yo, I worked hard to get all of this. So if people call it hubris, call it what you want, man, but you also can't call me no fraud either.